Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone! A couple weeks ago, one of my mentors, Aaron Rose, invited me to come on Instagram Live and have a conversation with him on the topic of building a business based on your soul's gifts. It ended up being such a rich conversation, and I want to share it here with all of you as well. We talked about how the two of us ended up creating our respective businesses as humans who are devoted to walking the path of our souls. We also talked about how we navigated the inner and outer tension that arose as we got deeper into this path, as well as how we met the challenges that arose as we transformed and redefined what business means to us. I think this was probably the first time I spoke pretty candidly about my experience creating a business based on my spiritual gifts and my creative calling, and also probably the first time someone invited me to talk about this subject. So it's pretty exciting and it's pretty special. And this is a topic that I've been spending my time and energy learning about and experimenting with in the past few years, and I share some of my perspectives. If you are listening to this and you also feel that this is where your path is leading you to, I think you'll find some really good lived embodied wisdom that I've had to learn through making a lot of mistakes on the path. Aaron is a transformational coach, a mission mentor, a speaker, and a writer. And his work has helped me and many, many others in stepping into our unique leadership and impact. If you resonate with our conversation and you feel a soul level calling to navigate what it might mean for you to turn your own soul's gifts into a business that has a positive impact and that abundantly resources you in the process, Aaron has a beautiful offering called God is My Boss. I joined this program last year and it's been very supportive for me in my journey this year. So I recommend that you check that out. He also recently hosted a free masterclass as a prelude to this program where he talked about all things spiritual business. Both links will be in the show notes, and I invite you to check that out if you feel called. Okay, here is my conversation with Aaron Rose.
Welcome everybody to today's Instagram Live. Today's live, we have a special guest. Jonathan Coe is going to be joining us. And this is part of a series that I'm doing this month. Our theme this month is creating a business based on your spiritual and creative gifts. And this is a conversation that's very near and dear to my heart. It was quite and continues to be quite an initiatory journey for me on my own divine path to really understand what it takes to take the gifts that you've been given by life through your experience on a soul level and turn them into a form that other people can receive, and to do that in a way that is new, that's not repeating the cycles or the distortions of the past, and to do it in a way that feels really satisfying and aligned for your soul. And this is something I've been doing now for the better part of Yeah, we're going on over 8 years now of doing this, and it's become very near and dear to my heart to share my perspective on the path of spiritual entrepreneurship with my people, because I know what it's like to have that calling and then to have this really long list of the questions of how do I actually do this and how do I do it again in a way that is aligned for me. So this is the conversation that we're having this month. I have a free masterclass coming up where I'm going to go a lot deeper into this, how to create a business based on your spiritual and creative gifts. That's coming up next week. So if you feel called to join us, I know a lot of you already signed up. If you feel called to join us, you can go to the link in my bio. All the details are there. So that's our little preamble for our conversation today. I'm going to invite Jonathan on in just a moment. Jonathan, you're welcome to request to join. And Jonathan is someone who has been a student and a member of different programs of mine, and it's been such a joy to witness and support his journey, his unique business based on his super niche and magical creative gifts. And I really consider him to be an ally on the path, and someone who I'm just very grateful to be in co-creative weaving with. So Jonathan is an astrologer, a musician, a creative mentor, a mystical guide, and so much more. And we're going to invite him on now. And in his own words, he's going to tell us about his path to creating a business based on his gifts. And you guys are going to get to learn more about him. And also, preemptive howdy to everybody who's finding me through Jonathan. This is the first time we're meeting. It's nice to meet you. All right, let's bring Jonathan on. Jonathan,
Hello, Aaron. How are you?
I'm good. I'm getting a little echo. Let's just get our tech oriented here. Am I coming through clearly for you?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Likewise. Okay, so here we are. Let's just take a breath and land in. And here we are in the Instagram realm to talk about something that is, I think, a real calling, passion, interest dojo for both of us, which is having a business based on your gifts. So I would love for my people who are just encountering your magnificence to hear in your own words, how would you describe your business? How would you describe the type of work that you're doing in the world? With of
Uh,
course, everything that we do has the multidimensional disclaimer of this is just one of many ways to describe it, but put some words to it for us.
yeah. This is something that came through as a result of our work together, Aaron. I feel like I really became clear that the heart of my mission, at least through my business, is to help mystics make art and help artists befriend the mystery, which is literally my Instagram bio at this point. So if it sounds rehearsed, it is rehearsed because it took me a really long time to arrive there. But I think finding that intersection between artistry and mysticism, between giving ourselves permission to really authentically express while also being really connected to greater power is something that has been a lifelong path of mine. And it then makes sense that when people find me and find my work and want to work with me, it's always some combination of the two.
Beautiful. And I like that that's your bio because it is hard won, right? We can't force clarity of how we describe what we're doing, but when we are blessed with that stroke of the inspiration where the mystical matches the material and we have that sense of, oh, these are actually really satisfying, accurate words to describe what's been happening kind of all along. It's a beautiful moment. And what I love and what you're saying as well is that you're kind of tracking those trends of, okay, I've been on my path. I've been delving deeply into the mystery and into the artistry. And also, as I've been doing that, these are the types of people that have been coming to me. Because I feel like that's such a quality of this type of business is, there's what we can prepare for, and then there's what is sort of naturally happening as an expression of our gifts. I would love to hear about the kind of genesis moment of this when you answered the call, like when you first said, okay, I'm going to put something out there that is a sincere expression of my magic.
Yeah. It actually started with music. And, this is actually, as I was taking a walk down memory lane, this was how I found your work. This was before I even essentially answered the call to work as an astrologer. Because at that time, I was studying astrology, but I wasn't really thinking of doing astrology as part of my work. And I found you because I had just released a music album and I was really in a state of dismay about the music industry because it's a mess. I think everybody here listening probably knows that. And there's this sense that I needed to create an ecosystem for my music. So it's interesting that it even began with that, and which then actually kind of led me to starting to give astrology readings. And it just sort of happened organically, Aaron. It wasn't something that I was I didn't make the decision of like, okay, now I'm going to become an astrologer. It was more that I was studying astrology. I was really into it. And I think just from my genuine engagement and my genuine curiosity and desire to share with people, um, I had a bunch of people like mentors, clients kind of encouraging me to do more of this work. And um, that kind of gave me like the wind beneath my wings to start offering my services. But it really took a long time for me to feel like what I'm doing is really mine, Aaron. It took a while, and I think you and I speak a lot about my 3-5 profile in human design, and you know something that I feel is very true about the description of the 3-5 is that we really learn through our bodies. Like we learn through our lived experiences. And even though I had never been one of those like embodiment girlies, I have found that to be true. I have found that for myself, I really needed to try things out. I had to be on the path to know what the path is, essentially.
Mm.
Um, and that's been a really important part of my journey in creating a business. That a lot of things I could make a judgment of it, or I could have a sense of whether something would work for me or not mentally, but the ultimate deciding factor is my body and my experience, and I had to try things out. So um I'm kind of reconnecting with your question, which was really about how I ended up offering my services. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the origin point.
The origin point. Yeah, the origin point was music. And then somehow, in some nonlinear fashion, which is also very much part of my past, I ended up giving astrology readings. And then I would say I also started teaching. I started becoming a TA and like a teaching collaborator for my mentors. And in 2022, I started my podcast. In 2023, I really started teaching on my own. And I think 2023 was when I really started to connect with what is really my work, because there's such a collaborative nature, I think, to my astrology chart, and also to a certain extent, my human design, that it's really, I think I'm blessed with a certain level of flexibility and like kind of collaborative energy. Like that's always felt very natural to me. And um, finding my own work, like the work that I'm really here to do, took me a lot longer, actually. And it was a journey. And I think throughout my biggest, like the work that always felt so relevant to me is actually doing one-on-one work with people. That's always been really, yeah, at the core and at the heart of what I do. Because I love kind of really tuning into people's field and being, in the weeds with people, strategizing. So, yeah.
Amazing. It's so beautiful to just hear in your own words the winding journey, which I've obviously seen from different perspectives, but and as I'm reflecting on what you shared, I'm keeping in mind all of the other beautiful members of our soul fractal line, to use a Gene Keys term, who are perhaps where you and I once were in this process, and kind of mining what you're saying for these gems of, if you're in an earlier place in this process of, okay, I think I'm called, like, this is, I'm listening to this. I feel like I have a resonance with these people. I feel like this is part of my path. But what's next? I'm sort of looking at, okay, what are those things we want to highlight for people? And one of the big things that I just heard from you is getting in the game, like getting into the arena in a way that is, and if you want to share anything else about like what you had to overcome or work through to let yourself be messy, because that's been my experience as well, when people say, how did you start your business? And it's like I can see these different origin points where I'm like, okay, I objectively made a decision there, and that was my first offer or something like that. But it really was all those little micro moments of saying, yeah, I don't actually like, do I think objectively that this is going to be my entire career? This little like bootleg meditation track I'm recording in my closet in Brooklyn? Probably not. But is it the next indicated action that I feel some energy behind? Yes, right. And so like that iteration. And I will, just for the design nerds who are tuning in, Jonathan is a 3-5 generator, sacral generator. I'm a 4-6 projector. And we both we're part of the North Node in Aquarius squad.
Yeah.
So despite many differences in our design, we have that soul piece in common. So yeah, anything else you want to share about the messy iterative process?
Yeah. First 2 years of me doing this work, I was exclusively paid through Venmo. Like
Permission to start small with what you have, folks.
seriously, I was just, whenever someone reaches out to me to get a booking, I think at first it was literally like this Google form on the link in my bio on Instagram. And then once I see people's application, I would email them and I would give them my Venmo handle. And that's literally how I got paid for 2 years.
Amazing. I think I did something similar. I remember some of my first like, oh, I'm really in business things happening through Venmo.
Yeah. So thank you, Venmo. And I think to your point earlier, each step of the way when I kind of had to move to the next level, there was a lot of resistance. It was actually, whenever I look back, the image I get is just like me, 15-year-old, like kicking and screaming, like that's kind of the vibe of every single, whenever I said yes to like an expansion or like a deepening of my mission path, it's been a lot of resistance. And so I think what I'm trying to share there is resistance get a lot of bad reputation in a lot of the circles that we run in. And I think there are really helpful ways to work with resistance, but it always has to begin with accepting, like noticing that you're in resistance, accepting. And I think it also really helps to surround yourself with people who have moved through that particular impasse. Yeah.
Amazing. I agree. And I feel like that's one of the big misconceptions that, what's that saying? If you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. Or that's more of a sort of 3D material business perspective. But then there's also the kind of, if it's your soul's work, it's just gonna feel aligned.
Mhm.
And like I often think about the metaphor of an Olympic athlete where, yeah, is it aligned for Michael Phelps to become the most decorated Olympic swimming champion? Yes, that's his destiny. Did that feel super easy? No, right? And so much of the soul's path is about that alchemy. And I'm the same way. I think about my biggest moments and it's like this fetal position, like one, just really quite the saga, because what is it that we're working through? It's the parts of us that are really scared
Yeah.
to step into our power and to overcome those fears. And I would love to hear if there's anything else that you want to share about that process of how you've alchemized that fear, what has helped you overcome those blocks to saying, okay, the call comes in, then the fear comes up. How do you dance your way through that
Yeah.
again and again? Because you wouldn't be where you are right now with, really beautiful community and podcast and offers without facing that threshold many times.
Yeah. I think the answer I'm about to give you is slightly unsatisfying, and which is that it's really different. Like every challenge requires a slightly different medicine or like antidote. And if there is one kind of denominating factor, it would be like getting really honest with myself about why I'm resisting. Like what feels really hard about this next level of expansion or deepening. Time and time again, what I found for myself is the fear of abandoning people. The fear of leaving people behind is really big for me. Um, I think as a dynamic being, a lot of us actually do need to. Okay, so here's what I'm. Let me see if I can explain this in a way that makes a lot of sense. Earlier, before I came on, you were talking about distortion. And I think this is such a relevant conversation for the emotional alchemy that often we have to meet in our path, creating a business, because a lot of the distortion that we see outside, I think, at least this is my belief, part of why they're bothering us is because we carry some sort of antidote to that distortion. And part of accessing that antidote requires us to really look at the distortion within ourselves. And that can be really challenging because the distortion was what got you through this point. The distortion is always a survival mechanism, right? On some level. And so I think part of what makes it challenging, Aaron, is literally you're kind of like grappling with yourself, like you're wrestling with yourself. I grew up, I grew up with like Christian beliefs and teachings, and one of my favorite stories was, I think it was Jacob wrestling with God. Like that was always one of my one of the stories I feel so much resonance with. Even though I have an interesting relationship with that, you know, body of knowledge now, somewhat still in my process of reclamation. um, but I've always really loved that story because that story is about you wrestling with this deeper part of you. Earlier before we went on today, Aaron, I was watching Richard Rudd's YouTube video. I don't know if you watched his recent transmission about business.
Yes,
In regards
yes.
to green
Christina
tea.
and I both dropped in about that, and I feel like I can feel why it's weaving in. So
Yeah,
continue.
yeah. So Richard Rudd was talking about, his journey, and he spoke about it in a more kind of macro way. She didn't get into like the gory details necessarily, but I think it's interesting even just to observe the shape of his journey, which was that he started off, you know, as a mentee of Raoul, and he was, I think, the first guy who brought human design to the UK. And then somewhere along the way, he felt the transmission of the gene keys move away from the human design world and to start really stewarding and shepherding his own path with the gene keys, right? So he had to continue to turn towards the business side of things, right? That part really caught my attention because, you know, he contrasted that with the experience of other kind of spiritual teachers who just kind of gave off the business side to someone else, right? Like delegated it fully, and then they're just kind of in their zone of genius, the transmission of the spiritual teaching, never had to worry about the business. That had not been Richard Rudd's path. And he was seeing how in the past 18 months, the kind of interest in the long form transmission that he does has been somewhat dwindling, which kind of put him in this predicament of like, do I cut my team? You know, what do I do here? Right. And I think I really love the honesty and kind of genuine heartfeltness that he was bringing to this conversation, because I think when you're at the start of the path, which I'm imagining a lot of people tuning in are kind of at the start of their path, it's easy to have this illusion that the journey is always just going to be this linear upward, you know, climb up the hill, right? But the reality, you know, as evidenced by someone like Richard Rudd, you know, who's really respected and really established, is that there's peaks and valleys, you know. And to go back to your question, I think every single resistance is different. Each of the challenge like requires a specific approach, specific tools. And I think it's helpful to remember that because I think one of the traps in on our mission path in general, but specifically when it comes to business, is to want to find a formula that you can then follow over and over and over again. And I think that could be true if you are a certain kind of person, but I have not been that person. I have not been that person. I've had to learn from many different teachers, you know, try different things, different strategies. And also, you know, one last piece I'll mention here, Aaron, is that when I started my podcast, I was very resistant to creating my own episodes. I did not want to do solo episodes. I just wanted to have conversations because I love having conversations with people. I always learn so much from it. And I feel like that was kind of my gift. And, you know, at some point, I felt the nudge, and I really had to listen to that nudge. And also, I was very, simultaneously, I was very against the idea of doing transit astrology. And I've been doing transit astrology now since 2023. So it would.
And for those who are uninitiated, give us the one-liner on what that is.
Transit astrology is basically looking at the transit, right? And like giving reports, whether that's like on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis. And I've really had
like being an astrologer, like weather reporter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I found my own way to doing it that felt really authentic. But, you know, if you had told me when I started learning astrology that I would be doing that type of content, like I would say you're crazy, you know? But that's where my path ended up leading me to. So I think that's, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes. And there's, you know, the way we're flowing with the questions here is like whatever comes through in response to what I ask is perfect. And so much richness in what you shared. I'm going to highlight a few pieces. One is I love that you're speaking to the fact that we can't predict where the path is going to take us. Did younger me think I would be having this Instagram live saying, let's talk about spiritual business? And I have some level of now embodied expertise where I can actually offer something on that or and have programs on it. And no, especially not like really younger me who was like, capitalism is the root of all evil and was just sort of pointing out the problems with the old system without having any sense of agency in creating something new. And so I think, there's the the many little and big ego deaths that are part of this path as well of saying, I want to get to know what the higher plan for my life is. And that's not some religiously programmed thing where you're going to have to like do a ton of stuff forever that you don't like, but which part of you doesn't like it and which part of you is wanting to be more expressed. And that's so I love that you highlighted that. And I also love that you really highlighted that there's no easy answers. And those of us who are in this particular consciousness stream and, the people that I work with in God is My Boss, which is my program on how to actually do this and build a business based on your gifts, it's there are certain tactical things that I can direct people to at this point, but so much more of it is almost building this inner capacity to wrestle with God and the mystery without tapping out and to just stay in the laboratory because we're not just making little widgets, we're birthing something very creative, and it takes a level of resiliency and flexibility. And the challenge of that is everything that we're talking about, that your fetal position temper tantrum with God moments are going to become, a regular cyclical feature of your life.
Yeah.
And the reward of that, though, is what everybody that I know who's tuning into this conversation, who's really leaning in on this, they have that taste that you and I both have, which is this taste for creative fulfillment and satisfaction. And, you could put together your little IKEA furniture, no shade to IKEA, but, or you could color by numbers and say, great, I created this thing. Or you could basically plunge into the void with no guarantees and then emerge with something that's much greater than what you previously could have thought that you would be able to create, your own unique piece of art.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, Aaron, is there second nature to you in your work that was really challenging for you initially to get into?
Wonderful question. And I love that second nature feels like such a powerful phrase.
Mm.
I liked that you said that one of the biggest challenges that you faced is that fear of leaving people behind. For me, it's been more the fear of being seen, which is less of this conscious thing of like, I'll be judged. I actually, Sag Rising, I actually have a pretty well developed ego aspect New Yorker who's like, whatever, say what you're going to say about me. I'm good. You don't like it, you can leave. I have a little sort of like protector inner, kind of bouncer version there, but and on a conscious level, I wouldn't have said I'm scared to be seen. But talking about the body, my body had such an intense reaction to putting myself out there. It
Mhm.
was like deep protection survival mechanism from childhood, from ancestry, and that was and continues to be, at every level of my expansion, I have to kind of hit another place in the spiral there of my willingness to be seen, to face the vulnerability of it. There's persecution programming in there, the feeling, however back brain it is, that it's not going to be safe if I put myself out there. And that has been a lot of my exposure therapy in my work. I mean, I used to come on and, do my first Instagram, or even I don't have Facebook anymore, but Facebook lives, and I would be shaking and doing my very best. And then I would get off the live and, fetal position, there I go. Takes me 3 days to recover, needing to do a lot of somatic work, EFT, inner child work, every possible way to create safety. And now, there's always a bit of energy when you're on the stage, however virtual it is, but this has now become very second nature to me,
Yeah.
right? I can pick up my phone, share from the heart, and trust what's going to come through. Trust my message, trust myself to understand what it is that I want to be communicating. And also, it's very Pisces Virgo. It's like I've got my Virgo preparation now, which is I know what I want to say. I know I've done a lot of kind of framing work that I can lean on. And it's also the Pisces side of trusting the mystery and just being in, no matter what happens, God take the wheel, I'll be okay. And allowing life to kind of unfold on life's terms. So to put a little bow on that, what does come second nature now is putting myself out there and say when I feel something. I don't always have something to say, but when I have something to say, the capacity to transmit that has become much stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. I also want to highlight something I feel is really important from what you shared, which is that piece around connecting to the heart. Because I think I'm curious to hear if this is also part of your experience, Aaron. We are such multifaceted and multidimensional creature that like the fear of being seen is actually kind of a larger umbrella fear. And the question is like, which part of seen or which part of you are scared of certain other parts being seen, you know? And what I'm
Yes.
hearing from you is as you connect with this part of you that's really able to speak from the heart and trust the guidance of the heart and higher power, trust the power of God to speak through your heart, you are able to find that courage, which funny enough, right? That word courage, the root of it is also heart, you know?
Yes.
So,
Yeah, it's that heart on fire feeling.
yeah,
And I know that I've had that, we can theoretically talk about how love is the most powerful thing. I feel that when I get out of my mind and out of the like, well, what if I say the wrong thing? And, you know, all of the overthinking that we can do when it comes to our message, when it comes to our offers. I'm editing my invitation page for something, I'm editing an email, all the mental perfectionism, and then dropping into the heart. I find that that is such a powerful medicine for me on my path. I can't tell you the number of times that I've been like, I shouldn't even send this, or, it's not ready, or I'm tired, or, and, but then I get into my heart and I just ask myself, why does this matter to me? What was the original intention for this? And then it's like, where did all that energy and clarity come from? Off I go, super excited to take the next step because I'm being moved by love rather than responding from fear.
yes, exactly.
Powerful. So just letting that land, I'm feeling into. There's another question or two I want to ask you here. To go back to the Richard Rudd piece for a second, I like that you highlighted what he said about like he didn't fully outsource the business, because that's also when I think about who this conversation is for. It's for the people who it's part of your soul path to not fully outsource it. It's like
Yeah,
you can build a team for sure. And as your stuff scales, which is just a fancy businessy term for your work has ripened to a point that it is ready to be given to more people, and those people are ready for it. We can build teams and we can let other people be in their expertise, but I find that for certain people, like, the business is the mission. It's learning. It's like designing the home
Yeah,
for your gifts.
exactly. I think that I'm as you're speaking, I'm taken back to one of our discussions recently about taking people on a journey. You were talking about you were teaching us about the launch process, and I really appreciated what you said about taking people on a journey there, because I think the business part of things is part of the journey, and let us not forget too that I think one of the biggest shifts that's really happening is a lot of us, you and I, as you mentioned, are part of this North Node in Aquarius squad, But a lot of us millennials are really, I think, and younger generations are asked to really recenter like what business even means, And I think this is kind of a big curriculum that personally I feel like I'm only at the starting point of, And yes, there have been luminaries, there have been people who are running their business in a way that's really in alignment and really serving their community, and also detaches from the martyrdom story that's so prevalent. It's almost like I feel like when I look at the market, the larger market, right? There's like the really predatorial corporations, and then there's also the martyrs who are like bleeding money in the name of service. And I think finding that middle ground, first of all, there's no right answer. There's no one right answer. I think many different solutions are needed to actually embrace that. And two, I think part of the solution is people really connecting with their mission, which is why I think your work with mentoring people on their mission path is so needed, because I'm going to bring in a piece here about a tool that I've learned from you, which is this morning meeting with God that you have been teaching us in different spaces. And this tool feels very basically, maybe let me start with like a little description of the tool, just in case people don't know. But it's a very simple practice of starting the day with a quiet moment and really connecting with higher power, with the divine, with life, with God. Name really resonates with you, right? The Great Mother, and then asking to be led throughout the day. And what I found really interesting about this practice, Aaron, is that I've had other practices, like for example, starting the day with a tarot pull, or I had an Akashic records practice for a long time. And this practice of the morning meeting with God is really subtle, at least for me. It's almost like for many, many months, nothing really happened. and it's interesting because what I'm noticing from continuing to be like gentle and persistent with that practice is over time, you start to expand your own definition of what your path even means. And I think for a lot of people who are practitioners, who are artists, who are creatives, who are kind of visionary type people, one of the most challenging things is we've had to kind of fight the what do you call it? Like the normative consciousness in order to get to where we are. And a lot of us will come to a point where that fighting stance is no longer helpful for us, right? Where that fighting stance of being anti whatever is actually, we're starting to wake up to the reality that maybe that's actually bringing us more suffering, or maybe that's actually in the way of our mission path. So there's kind of an integration that's necessary there. And I think that integration requires you to continue to come back over and over again to kind of this connection to divine source, divine intelligence, divine wisdom that all of us have and that really speak to us in very different ways. You know, like basically clearing your own unique channel um, is I think a big part of this.
Thank you for bringing that in. I love that you spoke to the subtlety. I commend your willingness to do it without obvious immediate results, which is in and of itself a code for people, is the persistence that's required in different aspects of the path, and a kind of releasing of an attachment to quick answers or instant gratification in certain ways. And yeah, I teach that practice, which, by the way, for anyone tuning in, there's a free version of it. You can find it at the link in my bio if you want to try it out. And I made it a version of it free this year because I just felt like this is it's such a strong but simple tool that I can give people, because in my own experience, it was also subtle, but it was retrospectively I could look and say, oh, I was basically doing this surrender process every day. And sometimes I would get hit by like, oh my God, most amazing idea. Let me act on this. Something, obviously synchronistic happens. But a lot of the time it was more like what I wasn't dealing with that I didn't realize I wasn't dealing with, because I was giving permission for infinite intelligence to not bring that distraction in, to not have that misaligned invitation come in, to kind of make clearer my path, often through subtraction, not just addition. And when we're here to do this visionary work, that clear channel is really everything, right? And for those who are tuning in who may feel like, okay, I do feel called to start a business based on my gifts, or like maybe I already have one, but it's not satisfying me. It's not where I know I'm below my potential, whatever that looks like for you. And there's an inundation of other people's ideas, or a mental feeling of like, I got to figure it out in this way. What I found in it, and it sounds like this has been true for you as well, Jonathan, is that those breakthrough moments come less through more information and and it's hard because when you're on this path, you see other people get information that changes their life. You
Yeah.
hear, someone who might be colloquially called a business bro, who's running a more third dimensional business, have an aha moment based on some more information than he consumed, and, have some kind of success. But the way that we work is part of the mission as well. And so it's like we're all being like, does your soul want your conclusion to be, thank God I listened to another business podcast? Or is it, thank God I learned how to source the next steps from within while receiving divinely appointed guidance on the path?
Yes. I want to speak to that, Aaron, because I think this is really a really important part of the journey that I have noticed younger me getting tripped up on quite a few times, which is I think there's a few different responses to this that are all actually, if you really look at it closely, are rooted in like avoidance or like fight flight kind of responses. So response number one is try to decide who's right. There's a lot of advice about how to run anything nowadays. Just open YouTube, there's like 50 million ways to do everything now. And I think there can be a compulsion to try to figure out like which one is the right way, right? And what I found about business is that actually everybody's right. Like people who are sharing a lot of this content or strategies, they are all probably coming from a place. I would say most of them, especially if you're tuning into this and you're someone who is sensitive or who can really pick up on whether someone's authentic or genuine or not, chances are whoever you're listening to and you can stand listening to them for more than 5 minutes, they're probably right. Like they figured out a strategy that worked for them for a specific moment in their journey. But I think that it's important to get out of the blame game of like, or it, because it's basically a really subtle form of blame game, right? Of like trying to decide like, is this the right strategy or is that the right strategy? But instead to give ourselves permission to orient to these strategies, not from a place of like, it's going to be the thing that completely gets me to the next stratosphere, and rather just like be kind of playful about it, you know? Um, and the other response that I have seen within myself or like the people I work with as well is um, getting really I think it's what you already mentioned, which is not trying things out and like trying to judge it mentally, right? Like I'm gonna admit to being the first person who struggle with this, which is everybody says build your email list, and I'm like, nah. I have such a resistance to it. And to that, I will say there are a couple things that are important here. One is even your resistance has its own intelligence, right? But that doesn't mean don't do anything. That means just like try things out. And if you still have resistance, rather than like being in this shame blame game, I think we can just clock that as like, oh, I'm still having resistance to this particular strategy, right? And there might be other things that you can do that you don't have a lot of resistance around. So where I've seen a lot of people get stuck, myself included, was focusing so much on the thing that you have resistance around and putting a lot of should in that without recognizing that there's this other thing that you can do. Like, for example, I had a lot of resistance to email, but I have no resistance creating podcast episodes. I create podcast episodes like a person who does it for their full-time job, maybe even more than that, which is kind of crazy whenever I look back at it. But I think each of our energies work differently, and there's just certain things that we have certain affinity towards. Like I have friends who are very resistant to promoting their courses, for example, but are really good at jumping on Instagram Live and just doing this, So I think there's so many different pathways now. We live in an era where there are a lot of different ways that one can build success and also define success. So I think, it's helpful to kind of get into, the morning meeting with God, I think is so helpful because it becomes a place or a container within which you can contemplate on some of these bigger questions. Like the bigger why of what drove you to want to have a business in the first place, I would argue is like more important than being perfect. Like you don't need to manage your email list perfectly. In fact, I've been finding that the less I try to make myself look perfect, the more I have fun in my business and more people trust me, which is strange to me, but I guess that's just how it works.
Yeah. That's so powerful. I want people to really absorb that because like we could literally talk for 8 hours detailing all of the layers of misperception and programming that we're all unwinding here around being ourselves, putting our work out there. And what you just hit on is that kind of, we're part of that generation that also has the outer planet stack in Capricorn. And I always think of it as like the kind of 80s dad at the corporate office with the tie and the big suit. And it's like there's the part that wants to look perfect and likes order and likes excellence, but that's can sneakily become a lot of control and kind of, that's been a huge part of my curriculum is the balance between making things very good and not letting that pursuit of that kind of suck the life out of everything. And that authenticity, because You're right. I mean, there's someone who I refer to regularly who shall not be named, but she writes these emails that are full of typos. They are they are they are definitely not edited, and they are such a powerful transmission of how she's feeling in that moment. She's a skilled practitioner and she just lets it rip. And if I were to get an email from her that looked perfect, as if someone else had then taken it and packaged it and edited it, I would be much less interested because there wouldn't be as much vitality there. And I love what you're saying about the wisdom of the resistance and also turning over that resistance in that divine connection and saying, show me why I'm resistant to email. Is it because I'm not supposed to do it? Or is it because I'm not, just not the focus right now? Is it because there's, a different way for me to approach it? Am I supposed to handwrite every email and send people a photo of that? It's, it takes us from the I'm bad, I'm wrong because I'm not doing it right to the artistic curiosity of like,
Yeah,
what is actually most alive for my path.
exactly.
So as we're coming close to our time here, um, and speaking of vitality, I would love to hear you share, when you think about your work and you're a sacral generator who's here to be lit up by things, I'd love for you to just indulge in sharing about what currently lights you up about your work. Like, what do you currently love about this life that you've created where you get to nerd out about what you love to nerd out about? Like, what are those moments that you have in your work where you're like, I love that I get to do this?
Mm. I love how my path is helping me dispel my own illusions every single day, Aaron. Truly. I mean,
Spoken like a true devotee and initiate.
um, truly. And I'm also, just for context, I'm a Virgo rising, Pisces sun, Gemini moon. And so I'm all mutable, like all big three are mutable. And so, for example, a few months ago, I was feeling really stuck in my one-on-one work. And then I introduced something that I never thought in a million years I would, which is offering people like additional support afterwards via voice memo, because I had so much resistance to voice memo for whatever reason. And I started introducing that to my practice and I shifted my offering a little bit. And it's been the most satisfying aspect of my work, Aaron. So every single time I meet these places where I'm like, oh, I'm never going to do that, I try to put, a couple fingers into that jar. And I'm usually proven wrong about how much I ended up liking it. So I think that's what I love the most about this, because and also and this I think ties in with being an astrologer, specifically doing a lot of like writing a lot of content, putting out podcast episodes about the transit, which is that I think it gives me a chance to really study the quality of time and how everything's always changing all the time. So, going back to what I was saying earlier about strategies, I love that this path, this business that I've created allows me to really explore. And recently, I can't remember who, but somebody was saying, there is this misperception that a lot of people who wanted to start out their own thing have about business, because we are used to seeing these giant corporations. And, this person was pointing out the fact that, the US Census .gov website actually classifies small business as making under like 40 million or employing less than 1,500 people. So it's interesting because that really puts things in perspective for me. Because I'm like, oh, I have all these ideas about like, oh, that's not ethical or whatever. But I'm just like one person. That's not to say that the question about ethics is not important. But I do think that especially when you are such a lean operation, when you're like a solopreneur essentially, which I am at the moment, I don't really have a team yet, there's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of experimentation you can do. And to go back to your earlier point, Aaron, about like kind of, this like 80s dad, like button up character within me, there's always this part of me that's like, are you sure? That kind of sounds like a potentially bad idea. But time and time again, I found that these moments are showing me places where I need to cultivate deeper trust in myself. And that probably if something doesn't feel totally aligned, I can take a couple steps forward, try it out, and then recalibrate, right? That nothing is ever really like that final.
Thank you for expressing it in that way. I love the freedom that you're describing here, and I hope those who are I hope that some people are sort of, as they're listening to this, casting off any rigid feeling of it has to look a certain way, or um, I have to be perfect before I begin. And this is a different business as a spiritual path in this moment. It's different. It's iterative. And like, why would we also go through all of the challenges and the growth if we weren't creating an ecosystem that's like feels like fresh air to us, that feels like, thank God I get to do this. And I'm not my own bad dad Capricorn boss who's saying, you got to keep doing this even though you don't want to. And obviously there's deeper currents of devotion to, allowing certain things to continue to exist beyond us. And also there's, yeah, the freedom to play, to express, and especially when you're earlier, whatever that means, you know, when the offers are still more mutable, still revealing themselves in certain ways, like really not putting the pressure to nail it down and just saying. And the last thing I'll highlight from what you said is you you also you're speaking to the fact that sometimes the most profitable, successful, enjoyable ideas come in the package of what that Capricorn business dad is going to say, there's no way that's going to work.
Yes. I've proven that time and time again. And also that's not to say that that wise Capricorn dad inside of us doesn't have anything really valid to share, right? Because
Yes.
something I've also learned being in your container and kind of learning from you is to try out these different either ways of thinking or ways of structuring things that can potentially in the future lead into something that's more sustainable and maybe more low touch, and I think both explorations can happen at the same time, right? And to the person who's listening to this who might be, because I definitely was in this place too, who is scared of like basically trying something out, building something, and then at the end of the day not liking it. What I will say to that is you can always change it. you know I think sometimes I see all of life, basically you were born, and then at the end of your life your body will die, and in between everything is just learning. you know and I think the same thing with this. So um I think there's space for a lot of the both ends. Like we can learn strategies, we can learn some of the best practices from other people. And I think the real question here isn't like what is objectively the best practice, but what is the practice that works for you? And also what I'm hearing from you too, Aaron, is like business is a practice. Like running a business, creating a business is a practice. And you can choose to engage with it however you want. I mean, I'm always forever inspired by my own piano practice, because it's like, my teacher used to say, my professor back in college, he used to say, it sounds very harsh, but he used to say, if it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And in some ways, I think we can apply that with, and filter that through your own lens in business, right? Because if it's feeling more restrictive and if it's feeling like it's kind of caging you in, there's probably room for adjustment there, you know? And there's always you can always shift things around.
Amazing. Last thing I'll say as we wrap this up is that I appreciate that you brought us back to that balance, right? Because that's so much of the dance here is where do I need, do I need to grow more on the faith side? Do I need to grow more on the implementation side? And how do I, Capricorn's not hanging out by itself, right? It's balanced by its counterpart on the other side. And really learning how to integrate all of those opposites. And this is something that I'm going to talk more about in the masterclass that I'm doing next week, which if anyone tuning in on this wants to have deeper teaching and support on this conversation, that's the next deep dive place I'm doing it. It's totally free. We're going to talk about the stages of spiritual business. And one of them is iteration, right? Which is that super like extra laboratory, messy, try things out. And then over time, there's a maturation that starts to happen, right? Where certain things want to solidify while you still have space to adapt and experiment and play. So to be continued on that. Thank you so much, Jonathan. This has been such a delightful conversation. I appreciate your devotion to the path and the, thank God you answered the call, right? Thank God you've said yes to this process, because I know there's been so many people who's been blessed just by this conversation and also by everything that you're putting out in the world, both by the medicine that they receive from the work, this freeing of their creativity, this making more peace with the mystical side of their soul and their lives. And so there's like what's getting actually transmitted through the work, but then there's also the example that you are, right? Another person saying, I can be my wild, multidimensional, mystical self and like find, create my own space, create my own ecosystem where all of me makes sense. So it's, it's a powerful example. So if anyone who's just discovering you through my work or through, discovering your work through me, where would you direct them? Come to your Instagram, come to your website.
Thank you, Aaron. That was such a nice reflection that you just shared with me. I really appreciate it. I think the best way, so right now I'm in a moment in my work where there's like a huge gap in between. There's my podcast, Healing the Spirit. There's a lot of episodes there. So if you like my voice, if you like to, I don't know, to see what I'm up to, you can just check that out. My newsletter is also a thing that I am getting more excited about, actually. I'm like in a period of like really enjoying writing. And then I would also direct people to my one-on-one work. I will work with people either, one session plus like 7 days afterwards of support with me through voice memo, through email, whatever your preferred method is. And I also work in like 3-month stretches. So there's that. And then I've been building group programs and courses, and yeah, just stay in touch with me on the podcast or the newsletter and you'll be the first to hear that. But yeah, at the moment, those two are kind of where it's at.
Beautiful. Amazing. Yeah. Tune into the podcast or the email also for like the medicine of watching, like those of you who got you're getting kind of this a little behind the scenes on Jonathan's process. It's like to get to now receive an email from Jonathan and see him like working out his feeling about email and finding what feels right. So thank you again. We'll wrap this up. Go check out Jonathan's stuff if you feel called to a deeper dive on, okay, really, how do I take the next step on creating a business based on my gifts? Come to the masterclass next week. Link in bio for that. Deep bow of gratitude, Jonathan. I love you. Thank you for being you. Have a beautiful rest of your day.